connection. Miss
All
Grace,
right.
I'll mute myself.
Well, we're very happy that all of you are here. And today we're going to have Grace, my sister, my dear sister. She's going to talk about eczema and the noni that is in the nitro, the good things about it. So without further ado, I will hand the time to Grace. She's a PhD graduated from Carnegie Mellon and doing very well in teaching and research now in UT Austin. Okay, Grace.
Awesome. So good evening, everyone. So I like to give my talks essentially starting off with asking myself questions. So as a scientist, I'm a person that likes to ask questions. And when I actually experience a physical improvement in my body after taking the Kyani supplements, I like to ask how and why I see these physical improvements. So one of the physical improvements that I've noticed is in my chronic issue that I've faced for most of my life, and that is eczema. I started having eczema when I was a child, and mostly it was localized behind my knees and on my elbows. Often it would get very itchy and I would scratch until those areas are raw and oozing with fluid at most times. And there wasn't much effective treatment back then. I just learned to live with it. Finally, at the age of 12, I kind of outgrew that early stage of eczema and enjoyed quite a few years of eczema-free life until graduate school, when I started working in the lab. And as I was working in the lab with, dealing with different chemicals and bacteria, I have to frequently wash my hands, and that caused eczema on my fingers. Initially, it wasn't too bad, but gradually it got worse. And around 5 years ago, I had a serious flare-up in Taiwan when I was visiting Catherine for vacation. And if you see on the left, that's how bad my fingers were, my skin was at that time. I wasn't applying any medication at first, but because it got so bad, I had to consult with my dermatologist friend who lived in Houston. I basically sent that picture to her, and she recommended for me to buy a strong steroid cream called clobetasol. And this cream, luckily in Taiwan, the pharmacies don't need a prescription to get medication. So you can literally go to the pharmacy and ask for whatever medication you want, and they will just give it to you. So since 5 years ago, I've been using this steroid cream off and on my eczema. And initially my eczema would flare up maybe seasonally, like when, different pollen is like high or mold is high. But then it became more frequent. And at the point when Kat introduced me to Kyani, I was literally having weekly flare-ups. So I would take the supplements orally only, right? And then didn't seem to help at first. And then on one of Kat's visits to Austin, Mr. Philip Wang came with her, and he actually suggested that I applied the Nitro FX topically on my rash. At that time, actually, he suggested that I soak my hand in nitro. I was like, what? Soak my hand in nitro? It's like, how much is one bottle of nitro? But I was like, okay, let me do a compromise treatment. Maybe I'll just like put a few drops of nitro on some gauze and apply it to my rash, and then put a, put a glove over it to keep it in place. So that was like my cheaper method of treating with nitro. Well, I tried this for a few weeks. Initially, I didn't notice much difference. I would still have those eczema rash flare-ups frequently. And my itch didn't seem to go away with the nitro application. But as time passed, I truly believe that, the Kyani supplements are their nutrition, right? And it's our body that's doing the healing with the right type of nutrition. So as it all takes time for the body to heal. So as time, increased, I slowly noticed that when I topically apply Nitro FX on my rash, even after scratching my skin raw, my skin would not stay raw for long. So like in a day or two, it actually heals up. In the past, when I didn't, before Kyani supplements or before applying Nitro FX, when I would just apply steroid cream, my skin would actually not heal in a day or two. And eventually, even after it heals, it would develop these really deep cracks on my finger creases. So that was one good thing that I noticed with applying Nitro FX topically. And as time passed, I noticed that the frequency of my flare-ups were also decreasing. So instead of every week, I was having it maybe every other week. And coincidentally, there was once where I took HL5 on a daily basis for a whole week. And I actually, ended up not having a flare-up for over 2 months. So being a scientist and, liking to ask questions, I wanted to know why this is happening, and that's the motivation behind tonight's presentation, which is to understand how Nitro helps with eczema. So before I go into some of the research that I found, I was like doing background research on the skin and found some fun facts. So let's look at some fun facts. Did you know that your skin is the largest organ in your body? It actually makes up 15% of your body weight. So if you weigh 100 pounds, 15 pounds is what your skin weighs. For an average person, if you stretch out your skin, it can cover approximately 2 square meters, and that's the size of a king-size mattress. Your skin is thinnest on your eyelids and thickest under your feet. It actually renews every 28 days, and that means that you shed around 30 to 40,000 dead skin cells every minute. Okay, if you accumulate all those cells into a year, that's approximately 9 pounds of dead skin cells that you shed a year. So when you notice dust in your home, it's probably mostly contributed by yourself. And that's what dust mites actually live off of. Our skin is also the home to more than 1,000 species of bacteria. If you look at a cross-section of the skin, you can see that the skin is formed by 3 different layers. The outermost layer is the epidermis, and it's made up of mostly dead skins. So dead skin cells that form a barrier like a wall of bricks, okay? The dermis is the next layer and it consists mainly of collagen and various nerve, hair cells, and capillaries that help our skin carry out its function. In this collagen layer, when we age, one fun fact is when we age, the collagen actually diminishes in this layer. So we lose collagen, and that's why you start seeing skin sagging and wrinkles forming. So if you want to look younger with less wrinkles and, firmer, mochi-like skin, you should take more HL5 because that contains hydrolyzed collagen that can replenish the collagen under our skin. So the third layer is the hypodermis, and that consists of fat cells and also blood vessels and muscle cells. Okay, so enough about the skin. Let's talk about our main topic tonight, and that is eczema. So firstly, what is eczema? Eczema, the scientific term for eczema is atopic dermatitis. It is actually a rash characterized by itchy, patchy skin that is inflamed and can form blisters. It can be hereditary and is more common in families with a history of eczema. This chronic disease is long-lasting and it can come and go periodically. And actually in the US, 1 in 10 individuals is affected by this disease. And there's currently no cure for it. One of the biggest consequences of eczema is sleep disturbance. The itch of the rash causes sleep disturbances in 60% of affected children and 15 to 30% of adults. So although it is not life-threatening, it can be debilitating. Interestingly, outside of US, individuals have a 50% lower risk of developing eczema. So some doctors believe the reason for that is because in the US, we live in such a clean environment, okay? Because we frequently use antibacterial soap, harsh cleaning chemicals, and we also are easily prescribed antibiotics for infections. So our body has lost most of the bacterial species on our skin that normally lives there. And that those bacteria actually keeps our immune system in check. And when they're not there, our immune system becomes hypersensitive to harmless allergens like dust, mold, or pollen. This hypothesis comes from observations by scientists that children who grow up in farms and drink unpasteurized milk actually have a lower chance of developing eczema and asthma. So that means we should live with some dirt. Don't live too cleanly. Okay, let's look at the molecular level when eczema flares up. Usually eczema starts because you have a dysfunction in the skin barrier integrity. Okay, when you have a break in the skin barrier, it allows external allergens or antigens to enter the body, and this activates the immune system. So the cell that actually gets triggered is this Langerhans cell. Okay, when it comes in contact with allergens, it starts secreting signaling molecules that can activate another immune cell called T helper 2 cells. These T helper 2 cells then signal and activate memory B cells. So memory B cells are the cells that produce antibodies. They produce different kinds of antibodies. In this case, they produce IgE type antibodies. And the IgE antibodies are specific for different allergens. And they get presented on this cell called the mast cell. When they come in contact with the allergen that it binds to, if 2 or more IgE molecules on the surface of the mast cells bind to the same allergen, it triggers the mast cell to break up. Okay, when it breaks up, it releases these signaling molecules like histamine and other pro-inflammatory factors, and these result in inflammation and itching. And then that causes a vicious cycle of the scratch itch cycle in eczema, where you have that itchiness, you scratch it, and you cause your skin barrier to be further damaged, so more allergens can get in, and your immune system is activated even more, and it causes even more itch, and you scratch more, and it just viciously cycles through. So in asking why Nitro FX can help with my eczema, I searched PubMed, which is the online published research database, with the keywords Morinda citrifolia, which is the scientific name for noni, the main ingredient in our Nitro products, and another term that's atopic dermatitis, which is the scientific name for eczema. And the results showed one paper that was published in 2020 by a Korean research lab. And in this paper, the authors fed fermented noni juice, okay, to this special type of mice called NCNGA mice. And these mice are actually genetically modified to mimic eczema when they're treated with this chemical called DNCB, okay? And after they are sensitized to DNCB, the authors gave the mice, like different groups of mice, fermented noni fruit juice. And they found that fermented noni fruit juice can modulate the immune balance, okay, and protect the skin barrier, which is, kind of what I experienced when I applied Nitro FX on my skin, and also taking the supplements orally. So let's take a look at some of their results. The authors, in the first experiment, they use these mice and they separate them into 6 different groups. In each group, there's 8 experimental mice, okay? So the various groups are, the normal group is mice that were not treated with the chemical DNCB. So they didn't develop eczema rash at all, okay? Then you have the control group that was treated with DNCB, but was not treated with steroids or fermented noni juice, okay? Then you have the PD group, which is mice that were treated with prednisolone, which is a steroid, oral steroid. And also 3 different groups of mice that have increasing amounts of fermented noni juice given orally. So as you can see from this picture, it's very clear that the highest dose of fermented noni juice pretty much healed the mouse of the eczema rash. If you compare that to normal, it actually looks very similar. It even looks better than the steroid treated group, okay? And the lowest amount of fermented noni juice actually looks about the same as the steroid treated group too. So it's pretty effective in preventing the eczema rash. And one thing that I noted that was pretty significant is the way they designed this experiment. So if I look at the schedule of it, you see here that the mice were first sensitized to a high dose of DNCB, okay? And then they were treated with a lower dose of DNCB 3 times a week for 10 weeks, okay? Before they were given oral steroids or different amounts of the fermented noni juice. And so at the point of 10 weeks, I'm pretty sure that these mice were having, you know, scratching behavior and some, you know, skin lesions on their skin. But short 4-week treatment with steroid or fermented noni juice, you see this improvement in their skin. So I think it's pretty significant result here showing that noni juice, and this is only fermented noni fruit juice. It's not the whole plant extract like we have in the Nitro FX. That, you know, treating these mice with these the fruit juice is able to heal it significantly in just 4 weeks. So that's pretty significant. Okay. Next, the authors measured the levels of various immune indicator molecules in the serum of the mice in response to allergens, okay? So usually when you have an allergic reaction, the amounts of IgE, histamine, TARC, and TSLP will increase significantly. So as you can see in this bar graph for the control, you see a very high amount of these molecules. And that's what triggers the allergic response. So in a sense, like the itch and the rash and the inflammation is more severe when these molecules are in high concentration. When the mice were treated with steroid and also fermented noni fruit juice at the highest dose, you see that the amounts are significantly decreased, okay? Some close to normal levels. So for TARC, histamine, and TSLP, they're all to normal levels, except for IgE is a bit higher, okay? So that's probably what, you know, in the molecular level, why we're seeing such improvement in the skin of the mice just with 4 weeks of treatment. Okay. What about the skin barrier? So the authors know that noni juice is good for wound healing. So they wanted to see if there's certain proteins that are important for strengthening the skin barrier is actually being upregulated or produced at higher levels when you treat the mice with the fermented noni fruit juice. So here they tested different proteins like filaggrin, loricrin, involucrin, occludin, and zona occludens. All these proteins are important for the integrity of the skin barrier. And in this image, the darker the band you see, the more protein there is, okay? So for control, you see a diminished amount of all of these proteins. when you treat the mice with steroid, they actually improve the amounts of proteins only for 3 of these proteins. Occludin and zonal occludins is still very low. But when you treat the mice with 1,000 milligrams per kg, the highest dose of the fermented noni juice, you actually see much more regulated levels of these proteins. And that kind of corroborates with the fact that you see the skin is pretty much like normal. So it actually heals over. And that's the property of the wound healing property of the fermented noni juice. And personally, I actually witnessed that not just on myself, but also on my 9-year-old daughter who suffers from eczema as well. You can see here on the left that after 3 days of treating topically with Nitro FX, her inflammation of her rash actually decreases. And even in my dad, who is diabetic, and he has very thin skin, it bruises very easily and it breaks really easily. He had a pretty bad fall this past year. And on the left, you can see his skin is pretty much, torn in different parts, right? It's not like a clear, one line break. It actually broke in different parts. And usually it doesn't heal very easily. And that's common for diabetic patients. But after 1 week of topically applying Nitro FX to his wound, it healed very well, as you can see on this picture on the right. So in conclusion, eczema is a chronic skin disease that has no cure at the moment, right? It begins with a defective skin barrier that allows allergens to enter and triggers an allergic response, which leads to a vicious scratch itch cycle. So actually, a lot of dermatologists will recommend that you moisturize your skin so that you can build up the skin barrier against the allergens. So by preventing allergens from entering, you can alleviate your eczema. But I feel that on top of that, Nitro FX it is able to modulate the immune imbalance so that our response is not as strong towards the allergens. On top of that, it can also help build up our skin barrier protein so that the integrity of the skin barrier is recovered. On top of putting moisturizer, which is only temporary, this is a permanent fix to our skin barrier. So with that, I'm gonna end my talk and not take up too much of everyone's time. So thank you for listening.